They're losing access to global markets because of sanctions and the war. A lot of them have shut down. The last time this happened, it was 1992, and it took the Russians 30 years to bring it all back online. They only finished last December. So we could have Latvia grab one oil tanker and this all just stops. 5 million barrels a day. They're losing access to global markets because of sanctions and the war. A lot of them have shut down. The second stage facilities are all in either Odessa, which hasn't had reliable electricity in 4 months, or Mariupol, where it was leveled. We've already lost 80% of global supply, which means that pretty soon we get to decide where we put our neon for purposes of making semiconductors. The other 20%, that's all in China. Now, China doesn't make the high-end microprocessors. They do the low end. So if you want like a margarita machine that sings when the slush is at the right churn, that's a Chinese chip. You want to do something useful, that's an American chip. And since the Chinese now control all of the world's remaining supply, what do you think they're going to prioritize? Now, the technical economic term for this sort of situation is that's a taste of the problems everyone else has to deal with. Let's talk about yours. What we've got here is a map of the physical infrastructure for the energy sector in the former Soviet space. Green is oil, red is natural gas. For starters, we're going to talk about oil, specifically the ports. These are the two facilities, Primorsk in the north, Novorossiysk in the south, that are the two largest export points for Russian and former Soviet crude. Here's the problem. The southern one is in a war zone. That makes it a little sketchy in terms of insurance. Speaking of insurance, you guys get insurance more than most crowds. You cannot have a ship go in or out of any port or any congested waterway without an insurance policy. The European Union and the United States have made it impossible for Russian chartered ships to get insurance. And as of January of next year, that applies to all Russian cargoes, which means the Russians have to self-insure their own stuff. They don't have the facilities to do that. So if one ship is hijacked, confiscated, violates an OSHA regulation, something, that's 5 million barrels a day that suddenly can't sail. And this is not Texas. This isn't even Alberta. Russian crude comes out of the permafrost. And for those of you who are from the north, not the Texans obviously, you know that in winter, as long as you're moving, you will live. But if you stop, you will freeze to death. Same thing with Russian crude in the permafrost. If the flow stops, the crude turns to gel, and the water that comes up as a byproduct freezes in the pipes. And everything from the wellhead to the pumps themselves cracks. And you have to replace the whole damn thing. The last time this happened, it was 1992, and it took the Russians 30 years to bring it all back online. They only finished last December. So we could have Latvia grab one oil tanker and this all just stops. 5 million barrels a day. What has happened because of self-sanctions in Europe is the Europeans have stopped using Russian crude wherever they can, and instead they're gobbling up most of what's available out of West Africa. They're taking stuff that used to come for us. It's not a big deal for us anymore. A lot of that is light sweet. We've got plenty of that. What this has done is reordered crude flows around the world. It used to be that most consumers would use the crude that was relatively proximate. That's what the refineries were designed for. Now, everything is stretched out because the Europeans are taking stuff that used to go to China, and since the Chinese are at the very end of the world's longest supply lines, they don't have the economic or military power to project out and change that, but the Europeans do, especially when it involves their former colonies. So are the Europeans going further for crude? Yeah. Africa's farther away than the former Soviet states. But it's nothing compared to how far the Russians need to go now, because they're now getting an extra 1 million barrels a day from Russia. It's nothing compared to what the Chinese had to do. They're now getting an extra 1 million barrels a day from the Russians, but that crude has to come out of Novorossiysk and Primorsk, go to a supertanker raft off Portugal to do sea-to-sea transfers to supertankers, and then sail the long way around Africa and Southeast Asia. The vulnerability of that system is extreme. This is several orders of magnitude more vulnerable than the supply lines we had during World War II when people were actually shooting at these things. Again, one thing goes wrong, Latvia. This all falls apart. We might push it. Here's everybody's favorite energy minister, Ms. Granholm. She made it very clear a couple weeks ago that if American refiners and gasoline and diesel distributors do not prioritize the American market, the US government will make sure that they do. Now, in the 2015 omnibus bill, President Obama gained the power for the White House to summarily end all American oil exports with a stroke of a pen. In any environment where we have a shortage of crude because of Russian losses, especially if it's 5 million, you can expect within a matter of hours that the Biden administration is going to slam the door shut on export capacity in order to keep the American market super saturated, in order to keep American crude prices more affordable. He, like his predecessor, is a populist. What Granholm said she wanted actually was the refined product. She doesn't have the power to do that. Biden does not have the power to do that. But if you trap the crude in the American market and force it to just go to American refiners, it achieves most of what she's after. Is it a perfect fix? Of course not. And we know for sure that the Biden administration will approach a policy like this with deliberation and consultation, just like they do with everything else. Be ready. It's coming. Now that, of course, is going to trigger a bit of a crude mismatch. Here are all of the world's major crude grades. It's all super light. It's all super sweet. That is what's going to be trapped here. That's Russian Urals. That's what we're going to lose. 5 million days of moderate heavy, moderate sour. Now, for those of you who are in the refining world and are having a heart attack right now, yes, middle distillates are going to be a bit. You are the industry that is going to complain the most and the loudest, and reasonably so. And then you're going to realize that this is not a passing thing, and you simply have to retool and expand your distillation capacity for the crude you have access to. Because you're still going to be able to import stuff if you want to, but you have to be able to deal with all this light sweet. So over the course of the next 3 years, you're probably going to increase refining capacity by 2 or 3 million barrels a day. And I know you're like, oh, that's impossible. Think about what the price differential for these crudes is going to be in this environment. Losing 5 million barrels of heavy sour, being stuck with 5 million barrels of light sweet in an international environment where the US is no longer contributing to global supplies. You're talking about a ceiling on crude prices of 50 to 80 here and a functional floor everywhere else of 150 to 200. You are going to bitch, you are going to moan, and then you are going to expand, and then you are going